On a white background, the CCD logo appears. Council of Canadians with Disabilities, a voice of our own, presents a series entitled Know Your Rights. The title disappears and the scene shifts to two women seated in a library in front of a rack of books. Join us now for a conversation between Yvonne Peters, a retired human rights lawyer and co-chair of the CCD Disability Justice Litigation Initiative, and Deborah Patterson, theater, arts, and disability justice advocate. New title appears, So What Exactly Are My Rights?
Okay, so Yvonne, I know that as a Canadian I have human rights. There are laws in Canada that protect my human rights, but what are they?
So let's start by thinking of three tiers. At the top tier we have Canada's Constitution. And the Constitution is Canada's supreme law, so it's the top law. And within the Constitution we have what's called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter sets out a number of rights that Canadians have by being in Canada. But I would say that the centerpiece of the Charter is Section 15, the guarantee of equality. It guarantees all Canadians equality. But it goes on to say it guarantees equality without discrimination on the basis of, and then it lists some characteristics, race, age, religion, ethnic origin, and so on. But it also says on the basis of physical and mental disability. So in Canada, people with disabilities have constitutional protection of their rights. So the Constitution applies to all levels of government and government agencies. So that's tier number one at the top. Moving down to the next tier, we have human rights legislation, sometimes called human rights codes, sometimes called human rights acts. And this legislation is available in all provinces, in all territories, and at the federal level. And human rights legislation is a very important piece of legislation. All businesses, private businesses and governments have to be aware of human rights legislation. So it not only covers government, but it covers private enterprises like restaurants, hotels, theaters, stores, housing projects, education, and always enforced by human rights commissions in the different jurisdictions. So it's a very encompassing piece of legislation. So then on the third tier, what we have, other pieces of legislation that kind of define rights in a little bit more detail. So we have the Accessible Canada Act. We have in Manitoba the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, and there's similar legislation in Ontario. And that lays out in much more detail what the rights of people with disabilities are. So they build on the Charter and they build on human rights. Each Human Rights Commission has on their website simple, easy to read little fact sheets, little brochures that summarize in simplistic language what your rights are, what your rights are as a person with a disability, what your rights are to housing, how to file a complaint, and so on. So that would probably be the best place to start in terms of finding, information to read. So those are the three tiers that are very important. And just one more little piece to add. So as a backdrop, we have an international document called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled Persons. So this is not a Canadian law per se. It was developed by people with disabilities and approved by the United Nations. And Canada has signed on to that convention. So why is that important? The convention, I look to it as the how-to manual. When you buy a piece of furniture and you have to put it together, you have to look at the manual. This convention sets out in very, very specific details what rights people with disabilities should have and what should be protected by legislation. So it talks about what are health rights, what are education rights, what are mobility rights, what are income security rights, and so on. So it's very, very comprehensive. So it's, if you will, it's like an interpretive guide for all these pieces of legislation that I've just described. So, as I've explained, Canada has a number of pieces of legislation that are designed to protect the human rights of disabled people. I believe that we as disabled people have the power to promote these rights and to ensure that governments enforce and uphold these rights.
End credits appear over a white background. Know Your Rights. A conversation between Yvonne Peters and Debbie Patterson. Series producers Yvonne Peters, Debbie Patterson, April Dobbin, and Heather Walkus. Videographer Leif Norman. Audio description Corey Stuvey. Closed captioning Nettle Media. ASL Sign Language Interpretation. Editing and post-production Eric Nettle. Funded with support from the Canadian Bar Association. Law for the Future Fund. Their logo appears. The CCD logo appears again. Copyright CCD 2024, all rights reserved. Fade to black.